So I had this idea to recreate every Apex Legends character as a LEGO minifigure, the ultimate goal being to recreate this group picture with nothing but minifigures, and in this video I'm going to add my first character to it. This video will be a lot longer than any future videos of this type, because the majority of it will just be me showing and talking about the process, and because this is my first attempt at making a custom minifigure, the process was a lot more experimental and longer, so if you're only interested in the final renders or just the group picture, the video will be timestamped so you can just go to any point of interest that you want. If you want to do something like this yourself, ETL Productions has some extremely useful tutorials on how to go about it, and this video 100% would not have been possible without them. I decided to start with Lifeline because she's my main, and it makes sense for me to do this in descending order by playtime. She's also the reason that I had this idea in the first place. I noticed her hair is somewhat similar to Princess Leia, and it got me wondering what a minifigure of her would look like if it used a recolored Leia hairpiece. So with that, I decided to start with her hair, and this is where I immediately ran into a problem. You see, Leia's hairpiece is available on Bricklink Studio, but not Mecabricks. This is an issue because the entire process of creating the prints and rendering the figure revolved around Mecabricks, and there's no way to export your custom prints into Studio from Mecabricks. You can export your Studio file into Mecabricks, but it doesn't export any pieces that aren't available in the Mecabricks library. So ultimately, you're at the mercy of whatever is available in the Mecabricks catalog. This is a huge issue that I'll talk more about later, because Mecabricks' library, for hairpieces anyway, is tiny. Especially compared to the seemingly full selection of every hairpiece ever made that you get with Studio, it feels insanely limited. So my solution, for now anyway, was basically just abusing the clipping of the pieces in Mecabricks. This is obviously not ideal, but I really wanted to just get going on the printing, and I didn't want to deal with learning how to 3D model or something like that before I could even do it. I found a hairpiece that has the bun shape that I wanted, but only one of them. So I placed two of them on top of each other and I rotated them from the same spot before recoloring them into the new dark red color. After a bit of adjustment, I got it to a shape I was reasonably happy with. Again, an ideal solution would be just using the Leia hairpiece because that was the whole point, but because it wasn't available in the library, I simply couldn't. Moving on and using Episode 2 Anakin as a reference, I went about designing the face print for her. The first thing I needed to decide on was the skin color, and for that I went for a medium nougat color, because I think a character like Seer has darker skin than Lifeline in the game, and if I'm going to get to him eventually, I'd like to give myself the option to go darker if needed. Lifeline's eyes are fairly narrow, so I extended the eyelashes to go further back to get this effect. This wasn't perfect, and I ended up changing these a little later on, but for now I thought it was fine. I also kind of gave her this smirk as a placeholder before I realized that it actually kind of fits her character fairly well, so I decided to keep it. Her lips are pretty big in game, so I really went ham with the lipstick printing here. I do think I shrunk these a bit later on though. I then gave her eyes some pink printing before moving on to the headband. I know LEGO won't ever touch Apex Legends, but if they did, I'd prefer for them to make a custom mold to get that headband around the hair, but as we've seen with how they handled the Hunter minifigure from the Bad Batch shuttle, I think what they would do is just add the headband as part of the face print, and then just put a hairpiece on top of it. So that's what I did here. Ultimately I wanted to be fairly realistic to how LEGO would do it, and I think it worked fairly well. Detailing the headband was fairly easy, and I went for a light bluish grey colour for it initially. I decided later on to change the colour to purple, even though this technically makes it inaccurate. The version with the purple headband also has blue tattoos, and this minifigure is largely based on the newer, more accurate version with a grey headband and grey tattoos. But I thought that the purple looked better, so I decided to keep it. From there I imported that to Mecabricks and moved on to the torso print. For the torso, the first thing I needed to do was decide on the colour of the plastic base. I decided on an olive green colour because that's the primary colour, or close enough to it, of her tank top in game. I then kind of loosely sketched in the main details that I wanted to put on the torso, the main example being the IV bag. I knew I wanted to make this a focal point because I thought the blue would really stand out and make the torso pop. I played around with that for a while before importing it into Mecabricks just to kind of test where it was. It was at that point that I realised that I was supposed to cover the entire UV map with the print, and Mecabricks would just leave the margins around it themselves. So I needed to go back in and stretch the design a little bit. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how the IV bag turned out. I think the upper torso is about right as well. The kind of belt thing she has was a bit annoying, and I'm not completely satisfied with how it turned out, but I think in the grand scheme of things it's passable. I then added some small lines to give her tank top some texture, which kind of felt like cheating, but LEGO did do this for the episode 1 Padme in the Anakin's Pod Racer set from 2019, so the precedent is there for them to add these small details to give shirts a bit of texture instead of just printing them completely flat. I was pretty happy with that, so then I moved on to the arms. She has pretty noticeable white sleeves around the center portion of her arms that don't quite extend to reach her hand. So to simplify that a little bit, I decided to just give her dual molded arms with medium nougat for the shoulder section and white for the rest. I then gave her some light royal blue hand pieces. That's all I needed to do for her right arm, but her left arm has some important details that I felt I needed to include, namely the continuation of her tattoo and the padding that she has about halfway down her arm. I colored the pad to match her belt thing, which I think worked pretty well. The issue here is that her pad goes over the white sleeve thing that she wears, so I needed to either forsake some accuracy and have the straps go over her arm, or print some white under it too, fully knowing that it won't wrap around the entire bit of her arm. I decided to go for the white underprint here because I think they needed at least some suggestion of the sleeve under it. I think that imperfection kind of makes it look better. I think it was at least worth a try, and I kind of like how it looked. After the arms, I did the hip printing. I took inspiration from Han's jewel molded episode 5 legs from the Betrayal at Cloud City set, because I think that jewel kind of belt design works with Lifeline pretty well. And because of that, I just needed to print the first belt just on the hip. I left kind of a suggestion of her stomach here too, kind of continuing on to the hip printing. I think it kind of works with what I'm going for because of the curve of the pants, but we'll see. I then copy and pasted the torso print up just above the UV map so I can get a reference and continue the printing properly. I partially included some clips for like her belt and the coil thing that she has, as well as her gloves. I don't think these line up perfectly later on, but they're definitely good enough. I think I added a little bit for the belt texture here, but I don't think that's noticeable on the final model. After the hip printing, I moved on to her right leg. And obviously I needed to continue the printing from her hip onto her leg piece. This was pretty tricky because scaling the belt print reference was kind of difficult, so I had to eyeball it. I think I guessed it right first try, but I'm definitely less confident in it than I was with the torso onto the hip. This part of the design was really densely detailed, so there was a good few liberties taken when it came to spacing some of them out. I also realized that her lower belt needed to extend into the middle kind of crotch area of the hip piece, so I used what is now my right leg print, and I copy and pasted that onto the hip printing UV map. It was really difficult to line these up properly and kind of scale where each print would start and which would end. In the future I should probably adjust the UVs a bit to make this easier on myself, because it was kind of guesswork for now. Thankfully there wasn't too much detail needed in this area. With that done, I moved on to the left leg. The most noticeable feature here is definitely the hanging glove. I struggled with it for a bit because hands are difficult to draw, before I realized, hey, wait a minute, this is a minifigure and they don't have human hands. So I switched it out for a minifigure hand, which I coloured to match the glove. It's a small touch, but I liked that detail a lot personally. I put very little effort into the lower part of the pants because it's not super important. In hindsight, I kind of wish I put more colours on the bottom to make those square sections a bit more 3D looking, but ultimately it's not a massive part of our design, so it's kind of whatever. I also made a few small adjustments to the belt printing and some of the colours and details of the leg ones, before deciding that that was enough for the printing. I imported my prints into Mecabricks, cloned the figure, and moved that to the side to get the pose right. I had this reference that I was working from, and I wanted the pose to match the group picture in the end, so that's what I was going for here. Once I got the pose more or less done, I realised that I needed a brick-built version of her healing bot to lean on, so I decided to quickly design one of those for her. It's not perfect, and it's barely accurate at all, but I wanted to make sure that it didn't make it too big because that would distract from the figure itself. I figured about 3 plates deep was about the limit in terms of balancing the design and the size, so it needed to sacrifice a few details to get there. But it's pretty much just decoration, so it doesn't matter too much, I guess. I made a quick printed piece for the red cross at the top, and then built the whole thing within Mecabricks. This was actually pretty fun, and I much prefer the way that Mecabricks have their pieces categorized as opposed to Studio. Especially for small builds like this, it was actually pretty smooth. After that, I made those adjustments to her face print that I mentioned earlier before going forward with rendering it. I rendered it on Mecabricks 3 times total, trying to maximize the size of the final file before ending up with this. I think this looked great, but there was a few problems with it that I needed to deal with. First of all, the picture rendered here is tiny. It looks fine when you don't zoom in or if it's on a 1080p screen, but if you zoom in at all, it gets really pixelated really quickly. Then there was the problem that I mentioned earlier with the hairpiece. By designing it and rendering it entirely on Mecabricks, I was pretty much locking myself into this website exclusively for these figures. This means that if I ever needed a more custom hairpiece or custom piece in general, I'd be screwed unless I kept abusing the clipping like I did before, which just doesn't seem sustainable and it doesn't feel right. This was bothering me for a while, and I didn't want to rest until I had a good, flexible system in place for future minifigs. And that's where I found out about Bricklink's PartDesigner software. Turns out Bricklink have their own software that also allows you to put custom printing on your minifigures. And because this is Bricklink, you have the entire full catalogue of every piece you could ask for, as well as the ability to make your own pieces and everything. This kind of felt like the perfect solution to all of my problems, because it meant that I could apply custom printing to figures and give them any existing hairpiece they needed, easy as that. But this PartDesigner software has some serious drawbacks. First of all, this is not printing in the same sense that Mecabricks is. This is just applying your own texture across the 3D shape of a Lego piece. And that's important to note for one main reason. On any Lego minifigure, there's a small margin around the outside of the piece where the printing ends. I imagine this is to give some leeway and room for millimetric errors when printing on a minifigure, but using PartDesigner's system of just applying the texture across the entire shape means that you don't get that margin. So immediately the software is losing points in my mind because it's not as accurate as it should be. The next issue was the way that you actually import the PNGs. Mecabricks provide you with these UV maps so you know exactly where you need to draw so that it applies it exactly where you want on the minifigure. But all you get with the PartDesigner is this extremely simple UI where you just upload an image. You also get this super basic and unusable scaling system that doesn't even have rotation options. In terms of what to upload here, they have a manual that gives vague image dimensions for what size your textures should be, and that's it. But I thought, oh well, if it means getting the most accurate hairpiece I can, I'm willing to just make some Photoshop templates for myself and deal with it. It'd be a few hours of trouble for me, but at least then it'd be easy moving forward. So I was playing around with this for ages when I ran into another critical issue with this program. Printing just does not line up with the figure right and work at all. I'd keep getting this gap at the side and the top of the torso that I couldn't get rid of no matter how much scaling and aspect ratio changes I made. It was just printing it unevenly onto the model, and it was really frustrating. I fiddled around with the scaling and the aspect ratio of the print for ages trying to get this to work, and I never found a solution that actually worked, even though that my original file was the exact same dimensions that the manual recommended. Surprisingly, I was still willing to put up with this until I met the final nail-in-the-coffin issue for this software. Turns out for some reason Bricklink Studio only has a limited number of dual molded legs options, and pretty much no dual molded arms. So I found this file by some Reddit user that were custom arm and leg pieces that you could attach together in Studio and emulate dual molded arms and legs by changing the colors of these custom pieces individually. But you couldn't apply custom printing to these, and this was the last straw. If I wanted dual molded arms or legs, they couldn't have any printing on them at all using the software, and that just wasn't good enough, so I abandoned this lead completely. And this brought me back to square one when it came to the hairpiece situation, because I was still not happy with it. And so I turned to the piece of software that I've tried to learn a few times in the past, but always got scared by its complexity and how steep a learning curve it has. Blender. Thankfully, it turns out ETL Productions has an incredibly good tutorial for exactly what I needed, and this video guided me through the process of importing your Mecabricks file and rendering it out properly. I lined up the camera to match my Mecabricks render and played around with different HDRI options, which I got from Polyhaven. Polyhaven is the new domain for HDRI Haven, which is the site that ETL Productions used in his tutorial for this, so fair warning about that. I started with Lilienstein, which I think is the most popular on the website. I really liked the look of it, but I wanted to see if anything else beats it because I didn't want to settle on just the first one. Next I tried Studio Small, which I figured would be good because it's what my lightbox tries to emulate when I take pictures of my minifigures in real life, but I hated the look of it and I think it looks awful and very obviously rendered. Next I went with the suggestion ETL Productions gave with Canary Wharf. I think the soft lighting was nice, but there was just too much ambient lighting in the picture, which kind of gave it a bluey tint, which is just not what I wanted. I then tried Abandoned Tank Farm, which I thought looked pretty nice, but again it had a bit of that tint to it, which wasn't what I was going for. The last one is what I ultimately decided on, and that being Kloppenheim 03. It has all the benefits of Lilienstein that I liked, but with slightly stronger shadows that made it feel a bit more real, I think. And with that, there you go, the final render. Going forward, I think Mecabricks into Blender is definitely the strat. You get the best printing experience as well as the best rendering with all the flexibility that you need to create custom hairpieces if you need to. And with the minifigure finally rendered, here it is in the group picture. I'll leave a link to the final rendered image in the description, so if you want to download it, you can. I'm looking forward to adding more minifigures to this group picture. I think it'll be pretty fun. And that's pretty much it for this video. If you're interested in seeing this group picture grow over time, then, I guess subscribe. And other than that, thanks for watching. Farewell.